Let's talk about Florida for this podcast. Here's my question. Does your real estate agent actually work for you? I think you're going to be surprised at the answer. Stay tuned. Welcome to another episode of Inside the Deal through Michael's Eyes, a fresh take on real estate and business in general. My name is Michael Renick, and I'm your host for this podcast. I've gone through my background many times. If you would like to know more about that, you can click on a previous episode, or you can give me a call. Let me introduce you a great friend and also a local attorney. This is Michael Hankin. He's a man I proudly call a powerhouse of legal insight right here in Sarasota. When it comes to understanding the intricate web of legal matters, the impact on our lives and businesses, Michael is second to none. His knowledge extends far beyond the basics, diving deep into the complexities that many of us find daunting. With years of experience navigating this ever-evolving legal landscape, Michael has built a reputation as a trusted guide and advocate for his clients. But it's not just the legal acumen that sets Michael apart. It's his passion for empowering others with clarity and confidence. He's the kind of attorney who doesn't just talk law, but takes time to break it down, offering fresh perspectives that make even the most complicated issues feel manageable. His approach is practical, insightful, and most importantly, action-oriented. So grab a notepad because you're going to want to remember the gems that Michael shares in this podcast. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment. Let's go ahead and get started. Michael, how did I do?
Excellent. It's a heck of an introduction. It's a lot to live up to, Mike.
But it's easy. And I had even more. I mean, that's the respect and honor you've earned and deserve. And I appreciate that everything you do for everybody in Sarasota. We met, about 400 years ago?
I think so.
With a folk. You're not old enough for that. I probably am.
I have enough gray. I think I'm old enough for that.
So I have a little bit of gray that's just starting here.
No,
So
not a bit.
Happy New Year. Happy 2025 to you, Michael.
Thank you. Same to you.
So I started with a question that suggested that maybe not all real estate agents in Florida work for their client. What the heck am I talking about?
So it is a strange situation. Normally, you would think that the person you hire to do a job for you works for you and has your best interest at heart. But the real estate brokerage laws in Florida, which are contained in Chapter 475 of our Florida statutes, don't provide for that. There are three different types of brokerage relationships. There is the no representation relationship, a transaction broker, and a single agent broker.
So these are relationships between the agent and the buyer or seller, correct?
Correct. Technically between the brokerage and the buyer and seller, but those are effectuated by the brokerage's agents.
So let me ask the first tough question. For the no representation, how is that a representation?
Well, there's still some basic duties. They have to account for funds that they receive. They still have to treat you honestly and fairly. So they can't lie to you. They can't steal from you. They have to show you money that they've received. But beyond that, there's really no other obligations for a no representation broker in that sort of relationship.
So what do they do for you then if you've got that kind of a agent?
Well, they're happy to take your money and provide whatever sort of limited service that they agree to. So typically you'd see this in a flat fee listing service. If you want to pay a broker a couple $100, maybe $500, $1,000 to take the information you create and put that in the MLS, and then you do all of the work yourself, that broker's not providing a lot of service to you, and consequently isn't paid a whole lot of money to you. And it's appropriate in those sort of circumstances.
So I want to throw a curveball at you. This wasn't part of the podcast, but when we're talking about the no representation, I just saw a listing and it went through something like that. So it's definitely no representation. And I know, for example, that there are a lot of special assessments and fees coming at that condo. Mm-hmm. And the owner of the condo, the seller, put in there We are not responsible for sharing what future costs may be. You'll have to do your own due diligence. Does that get the seller? I know this is a curveball. Does that get the seller off the hook?
So no, an unknowing seller selling their own property without any sort of representation, without any sort of guidance, is likely just to complete the standard Florida Association of Realtor forms. On the second page of a condominium rider, which is a standard Florida Association of Realtor forms, there's three blanks. And if you don't fill in those blanks, you as a seller are on the hook for any special assessments that have been discussed at a board meeting in the last 12 months. So you hire a no rep broker, they're not going to tell you that. They don't owe that obligation to you. And you unknowingly haven't gone out, looked at those assessments. So you probably have not made that disclosure in that document to the buyer. And if you sign that as is, you have just legally become obligated to pay any of those non-disclosed assessments.
So a non-representation agreement doesn't benefit the seller based on what you just shared. It must benefit the buyer then, right? A buyer would want to do that?
Well, I really only see a place for no rep brokers, a legitimate place for no rep brokers and flat fee listing services. If a broker is getting paid a fair market commission, whatever that may be, whatever that's negotiated between the broker and their client, they should exercise diligence in what they do. They should do a good job, which is expected of anybody you hire, right? You want them to do a good job. That's what you are paying them for.
So the no representation really doesn't benefit anybody. It might cut some costs down. But in terms of the work that needs to be done, a real estate transaction is a complex transaction. There's all kinds of stuff that happens in those. So, all right. So that's one of the three, the no representation. Let's tackle the fun one because transaction brokers, in my mind, don't work for the client and they don't have to disclose.
So a transaction broker is the default sort of representation in Florida. If your broker doesn't tell you what they are a transaction broker. That is the default relationship. And a transaction broker has the same minimal level of obligation that a no representation broker does, plus some extra. So a transaction broker has to account for funds. They have to treat you honestly and fairly. They have to also disclose anything that they know about the property, which materially affects its value. And they have to use skill, care, and diligence in the transaction. But they don't have to look out for your best interest. So if you're a buyer, they don't have to try to get you the best price. If you're a seller, they also don't have to give you the best price. They are working to make the transaction happen. Some people describe the relationship as the transaction broker doesn't represent the buyer or seller, they represent the transaction. They're working to make sure a transaction happens rather than it happening in the best interest of a client they represent.
So I'm confused. You're going to like this. Everybody who's working with an agent at one point or another, they're talking to friends and family and they're saying, my agent this, my agent that, good, positive things like that. But with a transaction broker, they don't work directly for that buyer or that seller. Is that correct?
That's correct. There is no fiduciary obligation. There is no obligation for the transaction broker to work in the best interest of the person to whom they call their client.
So I define fiduciary as the responsibility to do the right thing for your client. Would you agree?
I would say yes. Generally, a fiduciary is somebody who looks out for the best interests of their client. It's not somebody who is just there because they're there. And they're not. They put their clients' interests ahead of their own interests.
So may I have your permission to ask you a question with absolutely no answer to it?
I'll do my best. Sure.
So why don't those kind of agents have to disclose that to their buyer or seller?
So I'll be the cynical attorney that I am here. I will tell you that there is no great lobby of individual homeowners or buyers or sellers of real estate as individual parties. There is instead an extremely strong lobby of Florida realtors and national realtors. And those are the lobbies who influence the legislature to make laws, and they tend to make laws that work to the benefit of their constituency, which of course are our realtors. So the Florida Association of Realtors creates laws that benefit realtors. And having a lesser obligation lowers their possible liability and benefits the constituency.
But it doesn't benefit buyers and sellers. Is that a true statement?
That's a true statement, yes. And most big brokerages follow that and don't want the extra liability of having to have their agents work for the best interests of their clients. So many of the large brokers prohibit any sort of agency other than transaction broker or no representation.
So when I first came to Florida about 300 years ago, and I learned about this, it was very clear to me as I was starting my real estate career that neither one of those two were going to work for me. I'm going to sign up where I am held accountable for providing the highest level of standard for my buyer or my seller. That's what they deserve. That's what they expect. That's what they think they're getting. That's what they deserve. And that's the only way I would operate here in Florida. Now, that kind of a feeling, that kind of a passion that I have, that's called a single agency, correct?
Correct, where you actually worked for your client's best interest. And to me, that's what I think people expect. That's what I think people assume the default is. When you hire anybody else to work for you, whether it's an employee or a contractor or whatever it is, you're assuming that that person is doing what's in your best interest because you're the person paying them to do that job. And to have the standard be something that's not that, to me, is wrong. And it's something that I wish would change in the Florida statutes.
So, as a single agent, it even gets, I don't know if it's the right word is worse or not, but it gets something. I actually have to provide a form and sign it with the standards I'm held to that the other agents aren't. And I'm proud to sign that form. I'm frustrated that transaction brokers don't also have to do it. But it's a true statement, right? I have to declare so my client knows, my buyer or seller, that I actually work for them. I have a fiduciary responsibility and obligation to them. And it lists, it's 8 or 9 bullet points of behaviors that I'm required to exhibit, correct?
That's absolutely correct. But as a transaction broker, that notice isn't required. It's only required if you have something different from the transaction broker relationship. And to me, if you're going to require agents to provide disclosures and written explanations of the duties they're obligated to provide, do it in all circumstances, not just in the minimum and the maximum circumstance. You should do it in the default circumstance so that consumers are informed and they know what services they can expect of their agent, and they can know that their agent isn't necessarily looking out for their best interest.
This is interesting because you said something key just a couple of minutes ago. The buyer or seller actually assumes that's the kind of agent they're getting.
I think
And
that's true.
we don't do anything to dissuade them that that's not true.
That's absolutely right. A person who just hires a realtor or a licensed salesperson, that's not a realtor, either one, has, if they have the default transaction broker relationship, they have absolutely no knowledge that the person is not working in their best interest. And I think a reasonable assumption that they are.
And what's interesting on the sell side, when I ask a seller to sign a contract that's approved by the state of Florida, my contract is almost identical to a transaction broker contract, except it inserts the paragraph notifying them that I am held to a higher behavior. And I actually sign that part of the contract, committing that behavior to the agent, to the buyer, or to the seller in this case. It, isn't it about doing what's right for the buyer or seller. Isn't that what? So this podcast is on the topic business done right. And in Florida, at least it doesn't meet my standards. What I've taught, and I've been on many national stages, and I've worked with many agents. What I require my agents is very simple. If the and if you're listening to this podcast, you're not going to see my hands here, but if the legal line is at a certain level and the ethical line is higher, my agents better be behaving at the ethical level, or they're not going to be a part of Team Renick anymore. It's never break the law, never violate what we're held to from a statute perspective. But if the ethical behavior is behaving at a higher level, that's where we have to behave. Being a single agent, in my mind, is one of those factors, one of those instances. Would you agree, Michael?
I think it even goes higher than ethics, and I would agree. I think it's individual morality, which is higher than the ethical obligation. Here the ethical obligation provided by our statute is so minimal that we, and I know you, strive to do more. You strive to do what's right for the client, what's right, the right way to treat another person, which is to work in their best interest if they're the person who chooses to hire you. Or in those instances where you can't. So if you, let's say, take a listing, you start out as a single agent, but then you also have a buyer who comes to you and says, I'd like to work with you too. You then go back to your seller and say, I have this buyer. I can, if I'm going to represent the buyer and bring this to you, and then I can no longer represent both sides. And you provide a new disclosure and you treat both sides as transaction agents. You're always honest, you're always straightforward about what your role in the transaction is.
And that's what business is supposed to be in terms of. Um, I mean, it's been one of the most difficult things for me to try to comprehend here in Florida. I'm not required to behave in your best interest, and I don't have to tell you about it.
Right. I mean, it is backwards from the assumption. It's backwards that it doesn't have to be disclosed, that it is contrary to the logical and reasonable assumption of consumers. Anybody else, you hire them, you expect them to work in your interest. But for whatever reason, the statutes just don't follow what to you and I makes logical sense.
And this is an unfair question. I'll preface that. Any idea what percent of agents in Florida might be single agents versus transaction brokers?
This is a guess. I don't have statistics on it because it's not something that is reported. In my personal experience, over 95% of agents are transaction brokers. Almost never is there a transition to a single agent. It's very limited. Most of the large brokers don't allow single agency because they don't want to take the extra liability of having the duties to work in their client's best interest.
Interesting. This is just, and I can think of many examples. It's kind of fun in holding a real estate license and talking about ethics. Think about that. We're required to take an ethical course, every 2 years, part of our rehab, not rehab, but initializing our license and stuff like that. And I made a comment one time. If we were such well-behaved agents, would they make us take an ethics course every 2 years? We wouldn't have to do that kind of thing. And this isn't the agent fault. This is driven from the state level. It's driven from the broker. The broker makes a decision. I can't walk into a transaction broker, national brokerage, and say, I'm going to be a single agent and become one. That won't happen. It's done at the broker level.
Correct, right. Your broker sets the guidelines in which you as an agent are allowed to practice, and you get to choose, or your broker gets to choose how that occurs. And from a business standpoint, it's not a bad decision for the brokerage to take less liability and not agree to have their client's interest in their as their obligation.
So now I'm taking off the gloves because you said something profound right there. It's in the broker's best interest. Business is not about what's in their best interest. It's about the client. What I teach, what we believe in, is that 31 years at General Motors, the one thing I learned and took away from there is how to read an org chart. And to me, the buyer or seller is the top of the org chart. We work for them. I'm not working for the broker. I'm working for that client out there. I want to do what's best in their best interest. I want to be honest. I want to be fully transparent. I don't want to have my hands tied. I want to do the right thing. And when we talk about setting a price on a seller or a bid price on a buyer, going through the analysis, showing them what the numbers are saying, they can pick their own price, obviously, but I can do a detailed analysis and I can recommend what the market's saying. Here's what I teach. There's 3 prices in a transaction. There's a seller desired price. They've owned the property. They've maybe raised their family. They've upgraded. They've done it. I respect what that price is. But on the other side, there's a buyer willing to pay price. And again, they've got their own constraints financially, what they feel the house is worth and all that kind of stuff. But the third price is a price that I own. It's called the market price. And we calculate that and we share that. Now, as a single agent, I own that responsibility to do exactly that. If I was a transaction broker, I wouldn't have to work so hard. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're a transaction broker, you can back into the price that's given to you if it's arguable that it is a roughly acceptable price, right? Because you're working to make the transaction happen. You're not working for the buyer to get them the best price, working for the seller to get them the highest price. So maybe you throw out a comp. If it's arguable, you can throw out a comp as a transaction broker to help to justify the price that the buyer or seller is willing to pay or accept. So, it's, to me, acting as a single agent should invoke trust amongst the parties. So it should make a seller feel more comfortable that my agent's giving me comps that are in my best interest. They're not misrepresenting it to push me lower to help the transaction happen. They are truly working in my best interest, and that's what their obligation is. And to me, if a seller has that trust in their agent because of that relationship, that legal relationship, everything is better. The seller feels more comfortable, the seller is getting information that they can rely upon, and they have a better experience.
And the sad
Similarly,
thing is they assume that's what they're getting.
right. And to find out later, oh, that agent wasn't necessarily being, I don't want to say dishonest, because you have to be honest with your client no matter
Right.
what relationship you have. But there is,
Totally transparent. Would that be the right word?
right. I think that's a great way to describe it. As a transaction broker, you have more room to play in the gray area. So while you have to be honest with your client, maybe there's an argument that perhaps this comp isn't applicable to this unit, and we're going to filter that out because we're trying to push the parties together. Where you don't have that leeway in a single agent relationship, and there should be less doubt.
There's been a couple of cases where I sell most of the real estate in a certain part of Longboat Key. And there's been people that have bought in here, used another agent to do that. And then, of course, because of my involvement here, we become friends. And ultimately, what they paid for their condo comes up. And I've been asked more than one time, Mike, why did I pay so much? And I smile and says, I was wondering the same thing. The agent has to show you the market data. If the market data says that condo you purchased is worth $725,000 and you paid $825,000 for it, there's a breakdown of what should have happened. Now, if you were shown that it was worth $725 and you bid it up to $825 because you wanted it really bad, that's a different story. But more than I can count on one hand, someone's asked me that bought in with another agent who had a transaction broker, and maybe the agent didn't even do their homework, didn't understand what the market really was here. But anyway, of the 3 types, I personally will only, and have always only been a single agent unless we had to step back because we have a buyer and a seller working on the same kind of a deal, because it's the right way to do business. It's being transparent. It's being honest. It's allowing me to work hard, provide my opinion, but also follow the direction ultimately of what the buyer and the seller wants done, as long as it's legal. Is that a great summary of that?
I think it's exactly on point. That's a great summary.
So how do we get this changed so that everyone has to disclose? I told you I'd ask you unfair questions.
Sure. All you have to do is set up a lobbying group of independent owners and buyers and sellers who typically only enter into a transaction once every 7 years, raise tens of millions of dollars and lobby the legislature to get it passed and defeat the Florida Association of Realtors and National Association of Realtors lobby fighting against you. And if you just do that, which it should be very easy, you should be successful. I'd hop right on that. Let me know how it goes.
I will keep you posted on that. I think I'll focus on remaining a real estate agent or broker associate out here and continue working hard for my clients.
I think that's a better way to do it, is to be the face of change, show the others in the industry this is how it should be done with your own actions. And hopefully you inspire others to change their ways, not follow the limited representation that's assumed to be the default by the statutes, and provide a better service.
I'm thinking out loud as you're talking here. I'm back to the first one where it's the no relationship, or no, what do we call the no brokerage relationship?
Yep, no relationship or no representation is what it's called in statute.
Jumping back to that one, can I assume that all I want to do, I tell the buyer seller, I want to take your $500, but I don't want to do any work for you?
Sure. I mean, you did say you used to be in the auto market, so that makes sense. It sounds just what I would expect from a car dealer.
Except I never worked at a
I
dealership.
know. I do you're in management and process development.
At a manufacturer, not at a thing like that.
Sure.
So that's how I would do the no representation. The transaction broker is, I'm an agent, I'm going to work really hard, but I am not required. I'm not prohibited, but I'm not required to be fully transparent. Is that correct?
That's correct. You still have to be honest, but you don't have to work diligently. You don't have to work in anybody's best interest. You are just a cog in a wheel as a no representation broker, and nothing more.
So I've got to share this really quickly. I've had an opportunity to teach in many classrooms, many national auditoriums about my philosophy, my way of business. And when I'm in front of a group of agents that have never met me before, I like to start out by saying, I'm a different kind of a instructor. I love profanity. I just love profanity. It gets the word, it gets the message across. And 4-letter words are my forte. I excel at 4-letter words. So if you're going to be offended, go ahead and leave right now. Just go ahead and leave. And let's start. Let's get the best 4-letter word on the table. I turn around on the whiteboard and I write the word WORK. It's all about working for your client. It's about doing the right thing. I never could see me stepping into an arrangement where I was the default transaction broker. That goes against everything I stand for. It goes against doing business right. And that's why I wanted to call this out and have this session with you, Michael. As always, you've exceeded the intro that I provided for you. I really thank you for your time and your insight on this kind of stuff.
Happy to be here. Thanks for making me a part of it.
All right. Until next time, take care, everyone. Thanks for watching, or thanks for listening.